There is a moment in every superstar's life when the applause becomes so loud that it begins to drown out the truth. For Dilraba Dilmurat, that moment arrived quietly, hidden beneath flawless makeup, immaculate styling, and a schedule designed to keep her shining without pause. She stands on one of the biggest stages in China, cameras flashing from every angle, a symbol of perfection whose image seems untouchable. Yet behind that brilliance lies a question that no one dares to ask. What happens when a woman so beautiful, so adored, so commercially valuable becomes trapped inside the very image that made her famous? Dilraba is everywhere. On billboards, magazine covers, dramas, reality shows. A vision of effortless grace. But visibility is not the same as freedom. And the more she appeared, the more she disappeared behind expectations she never chose. The public saw a goddess. The industry saw an asset. Few ever stopped to wonder what she saw when she looked at herself. The pressure tightened around her long before anyone realized it. Roles selected not for challenge but for market safety. Schedules arranged without space for reflection. Narratives written for her, rather than by her. She was praised endlessly for her beauty, yet that praise became a cage. Every compliment reinforced the same question. Was she admired because of her talent or because the industry needed her to remain exactly as she was? Tonight, the spotlight follows her like destiny. But shadows always gather where light refuses to move. Behind the perfection is a woman fighting for the right to choose her path. And the truth she carries is far heavier than the crown the public thinks she wears. So who is Dilraba when the cameras stop? And what story has the industry been hiding beneath her brilliance all along? Long before she became one of the most recognizable faces in Kbiz, Dilraba's story began in a place far removed from the noise of the entertainment industry. Born in Xinjiang, her early life was filled with music, movement, and quiet discipline. She did not grow up surrounded by fame or ambition. What she carried instead was a kind of natural charisma, the kind that does not need to demand attention because it already holds it without effort. When she stepped onto a stage for the first time as a trainee, people noticed. Not because she tried to be noticed, but because her presence refused to be ignored. Her beauty quickly became the first thing the industry talked about. But beauty alone does not create loyalty. What truly captured the audience was her sincerity. Dilraba never presented herself as unreachable. She carried warmth in her smile, shyness in her gestures, and an earnestness that made her stand apart from the perfectly engineered idols of her generation. The combination was irresistible. She rose faster than most newcomers, and each new appearance seemed to reinforce the idea that a star had already been formed. Her early roles reflected this narrative. Bright, lovely characters, pure heroines, spirited young women full of optimism. These roles gave her visibility, and visibility gave her opportunity. But they also built a framework around her long before she understood its consequences. Every success shaped the image she would later struggle to escape. She became the poster woman for beauty and innocence, an ideal projected onto her repeatedly until it calcified into expectation. As her fame grew, the gap between Dilraba the person and Dilraba the symbol widened. She worked tirelessly, accepting projects that demanded long hours and minimal rest. She appeared at events in flawless gowns, her expression always poised, her demeanor always controlled. To the public, she seemed endlessly radiant. To the industry, she seemed endlessly usable. Brands sought her for campaigns not because of what she represented artistically, but because of how perfectly she fit the mold of a modern commercial goddess. But this early rise came with a quiet cost. The more successful she became, the less room she had to experiment. Every casting decision was filtered through the lens of her market value. Every role was assessed not only for its narrative potential but for its risk. Would this character preserve the image that made her profitable? Would the script allow her to remain the goddess the public demanded? Would this performance keep her within the frame the system had set for her? Dilraba complied, not out of weakness, but out of responsibility. She understood that her career had been built on collective effort. Management, brands, investors, producers, all of them depended on her consistency. For a while, she believed this was simply part of the job. To work harder, to smile more, to accept that stability was more important than personal exploration. Yet beneath the surface, the pressure began to settle into her bones. She knew she could do more. She knew she had potential that extended far beyond the roles she was given. But potential does not matter in an industry that prioritizes safety over growth. And the safer she became, the more confined she felt. The narrative surrounding her was no longer in her hands. It belonged to the system that had shaped her into an icon long before she had a chance to define herself. By the time she reached the height of her early career, Dilraba was already living inside a version of herself created by others. And the cracks in that carefully polished image were beginning to show. The turning point in Dilraba's career did not arrive with scandal or public mistake. It arrived through something far more subtle, yet far more damaging. It arrived when the industry decided she was too perfect to change. The expectation that once helped her rise became the same force that began to limit her. Producers stopped asking what she wanted to explore. They began asking only what she could guarantee. And because Dilraba's image had become synonymous with beauty, softness, and commercial reliability, that guarantee became a cage disguised as opportunity. It started quietly, a role that looked familiar, a script that felt repetitive, a storyline that mirrored one she had already lived on screen several times. At first, Dilraba accepted these choices as part of maintaining stability. Every actor has periods where they take on roles that feel similar. Every career has cycles. But then the requests became patterns, and the patterns became expectations, and those expectations solidified into rules. She was asked to smile more, to soften her gaze, to embody purity, to be the fantasy the public could escape into. And though she could deliver effortlessly, she knew that each performance pulled her further from the space she longed to reach. When she looked at more demanding scripts that required nuance or a departure from her established image, the responses were always the same. Too risky, too dark, too different from what audiences want to see from you. The unspoken message was clear. Dilraba was not being protected. She was being preserved. This preservation became more obvious as her schedule intensified. She worked nonstop, moving from set to set, promotion to promotion, project to project. There was no pause, no breath, no chance to step outside the frame she had been placed in. Time was not her own. Choices were not her own. And every day spent delivering polished, flawless work only reinforced the belief that this was the only version of Dilraba the industry could trust. Public criticism soon followed. Not because she failed, but because she succeeded too consistently at the roles she was given. Viewers asked why she was not improving, why her performances felt familiar, why she was not choosing challenging characters. They did not realize she had not been given the freedom to choose at all. They saw repetition as complacency. But repetition was a system imposed upon her. The pressure intensified when the conversation around her shifted from admiration to analysis. People began to question whether Dilraba was merely a visual celebrity, someone whose beauty overshadowed her potential, not realizing that the industry itself had limited her access to the very opportunities that could have proved them wrong. This was the moment the ground beneath her shifted, when the expectations that once lifted her up began to compress her from every side. The more she tried to meet them, the more she lost the space to show who she really was. And as the noise around her image grew louder, the silence around her true desires grew heavier. The trigger was not a single event. It was a realization. Dilraba was no longer choosing her path. The path was choosing her. The conflict did not explode all at once. It tightened slowly, like an invisible thread wrapping around Dilraba's life until she could no longer pretend it was just part of the job. The deeper she stepped into her career, the more she began to realize that success in showbiz came with a paradox. The higher the star rises, the smaller her world becomes. For Dilraba, that world grew so small she could barely move inside it. Her management saw her as a perfect commercial figure, a flawless face, a guaranteed seller. Every decision about her career became a calculation, and every calculation revolved around preserving her market value. She wanted to experiment. They wanted stability. She wanted to break patterns. They wanted familiarity. She wanted a challenge. They wanted safety. And the more she pushed, the more the system pushed back. Scripts with depth were quietly redirected to others. Roles that required emotional complexity were labeled unsuitable for her image. When she expressed interest in characters who were flawed or darker or more demanding, the answer always circled back to the same idea. This is not what the audience wants from you. What they really meant was, this is not what the system allows you to want. Her public appearances became even more controlled. Stylists crafted every look to match the Godis persona. PR teams filtered her interviews to avoid anything that might disrupt the image built around her. She stood at the center of countless flashing cameras, yet everything about her presence was choreographed by someone else. The girl from Xinjiang, once full of curiosity and unfiltered emotion, had become a symbol held together by invisible rules. The pressure reached a breaking point as each new project added another layer of conflict. Fans demanded growth. Producers demanded safety. Critics demanded proof of her talent. But how could she grow when she was not allowed to choose? How could she prove herself when the system refused to give her a role that required proving anything? The image that made her famous was now being used to justify limiting her. This tension became even clearer during the moments when she was alone. Late nights on set, quiet rides between events, long days spent repeating the same expressions for the sake of branding. She knew she was capable of more. She felt it every time she held a script that excited her but was later told to put away. Every time she saw her name tied to a project she did not believe in but had to accept. Every time she looked into a camera and delivered a performance that was good, but not the performance she wanted to give. The conflict was no longer just external. It had settled inside her. A battle between who she was expected to be and who she wanted to become. A battle between the goddess on screen and the woman off screen who longed for a role that would let her breathe. A battle between applause and authenticity. And the more she tried to navigate these forces, the more she realized that the true obstacle was not public criticism, but the silent system that demanded she stay exactly the same. For the first time, Dilraba understood that she was being protected only on the surface. In reality, she was being restrained. The moment of rupture arrived not with a public scandal but with a truth too sharp to ignore. It happened when a project she had quietly resisted was announced without her full consent. Her name was placed beside a script she did not believe in, a role designed not to challenge her but to maintain the illusion of who she was supposed to be. And when the backlash came, as everyone knew it would, the weight of blame settled on her shoulders and her shoulders alone. It was a perfect illustration of how the system protected itself by sacrificing the person at the center of it. For the first time, fans questioned her choices openly. Critics spoke of stagnation. Comment sections filled with frustration. Why is she repeating the same kind of roles? Why does she not choose better scripts? Why doesn't she fight for her career? What they did not see was that she had fought. What they could not imagine was that even a top actress could lose control over her own name. The silence around her was not indifference. It was limitation. Behind the scenes, the pressure narrowed into something almost suffocating. Meetings became negotiations she could not win. Opportunities that excited her were dismissed in seconds. Recommendations she made were filtered through layers of cautious decision-makers who valued predictability above passion. And every time she tried to step forward, she was reminded of what was expected from her. Stay beautiful. Stay gentle. Stay safe. Stay sellable. Stay in the frame we built for you. That was the breaking point. Not an explosion. Not a public meltdown. But a quiet, devastating realization that she had become the only person in her career who was not allowed to change. The industry wanted her. everywhere, yet it refused to let her evolve. It wanted her name, her image, her fame, but not her voice. And the more the public demanded proof of her growth, the more trapped she became in roles. That made growth impossible. Even the media began to turn the narrative into a cycle of contradiction. They praised her beauty, then criticized her for relying on it. They admired her popularity, then questioned her depth. They celebrated her success, then used that same success to argue she had no reason to demand more. Every spotlight that followed her became both illumination and interrogation. Every photo taken of her became both admiration and expectation. She was seen everywhere, yet understood nowhere. In one of her rare quiet interviews, she was asked whether she ever felt misunderstood. Her pause was long, just long enough to reveal the truth beneath the surface. Because misunderstanding was not the problem. Misrepresentation was. She was a woman being asked to live inside a role she did not write, and the world had mistaken the performance for the person. This was the climax of her silent struggle. The moment Dilraba realized that the greatest challenge in her career was not overcoming failure but surviving success. She could no longer outrun the expectations closing in around her. And for the first time, she understood that escaping the frame would require breaking rules she never agreed to follow. When the pressure finally forced her to stop and look inward, Dilraba found herself standing at a crossroads she had avoided for years. She could continue the path that guaranteed stability, or she could risk everything for a chance to reclaim her voice. And for the first time, she chose the second path. Quietly, deliberately, she began turning down offers that treated her beauty as the beginning and end of her value. She started searching for roles that demanded emotion rather than perfection, vulnerability rather than fantasy. Her choices grew slower but sharper, and with each decision she carved a small piece of freedom back into her career. The public noticed the change long before the industry admitted it. They saw a woman who no longer moved according to the rhythm set by others. They saw the subtle strength in her refusal to repeat herself. They saw the evolution in her gaze, no longer soft by requirement but firm with clarity. And in that shift, they began to understand that Dilraba was not resisting the system out of defiance, but out of necessity. She had reached a point where remaining the same was a greater risk than changing. The industry, however, responded cautiously. Some welcomed her new direction, recognizing the depth she had been forced to suppress. Others worried that stepping outside her established image would destabilize the commercial machine built around her. But Dilraba no longer shaped her decisions around their fears. She knew the cost of silence too well. She understood what it meant to be admired, and yet unseen. And she realized that a career built entirely on expectations will eventually collapse under their weight. The shift in her choices led to a shift in public perception. Viewers began to acknowledge her effort, her discipline, and her desire to grow beyond what was convenient. The conversations around her slowly transformed from beauty to capability, from market value to artistic ambition. It was not an instant transformation. It was a gradual reclaiming of identity, built one honest step at a time. Yet the truth remains. Even now, Dilraba moves through an industry that values stability over freedom and predictability over authenticity. She may have gained more control than before, but she still carries the weight of being a symbol in a system that rarely allows its symbols to evolve. Her journey is far from complete. Her struggle is far from resolved. But what has changed is her understanding of herself. She is no longer the woman waiting for permission to grow. She is the woman willing to reshape her path even when the world prefers her unchanged. And as the spotlight continues to follow her, something else begins to shift in its glow. Not the perfection that once defined her, but the determination beneath it. Not the image crafted by others, but the identity she is finally allowing herself to claim. Dilraba may still be navigating a world that demands she stay the same, but she is no longer walking through it quietly. Her silence has become intention. Her restraint has become strength. And for the first time, the story that surrounds her no longer defines her. She defines it.